Welcome to today's webcast. This call is being recorded. And now, to begin the program, I'd like to introduce Chris Flack.
Hey, Don, thank you so much, and welcome everybody in our audience to today's webcast, How Phishing Has Become Office 365's #1 security risk, and why hackers are targeting your Office 365 users, sponsored by Avanan. I'm Chris Flack with Redmond Magazine, and I'm here to be your host for today's event. So thank you all for joining us for today's presentation. We appreciate you taking time out of your busy days to do so thank you all for that. Okay, just a couple reminders before we begin today's presentation and introduce our speaker and get all the fun underway. So first things first is we are recording today's event for future viewing and listening purposes, and we'll send you a link to the email you registered with within 24 to 48 hours after the webcast where you can view the replay. We encourage you to share that link with coworkers, colleagues, friends, anybody who may be interested on today's topic. Also, there's actually a Refer a Colleague link right down there in the Resource tab of your doc down there. Please feel free to actually refer a colleague right now. You can send them a link. It'll initiate a little invitation to them, and you guys can actually privately chat with each other during the presentation today. So please do that if you're interested in inviting your coworkers. We're also going to have a Q&A session at the end of today's webcast. If you do have a question for either of our presenters, please feel free to enter your question at any time via the Ask a Question box on the left-hand side of your console. And hopefully, if time permits, we'll get to everybody's questions and get out some answers. Joined today by two really great presenters. A little bit later on, you're going to hear from Michael Landu. He's the co-founder of Avanan. He has over 15 years startup experience as an early employee of 3 high-growth technology companies. He's taken leadership roles in engineering, sales, marketing, and business development, and he holds an MBA from New York University. Oh, go NYU. He's actually going to be coming up later, going to do a really awesome demo to show off what they've got to offer. We're also going to be joined today by Stephen Toole. He is the CMO of Avanan. For the past 25 years, Stephen has led marketing for innovative technology companies in the areas of security, cloud computing, machine learning, and backup and recovery. Among other things, leading to over $1.7 billion in successful exits to companies such as Symantec, Dell, and others. He has an MBA and Master of International Management from the University of Maryland and a BA in Communications from Syracuse University. Go Orange. And without any further ado, I'll let those guys take the floor to get started. So Stephen and Michael, get underway, guys.
Hey, thanks a lot, Chris and Don. Appreciate you guys setting us up there. Welcome, everybody. I'm Stephen Toole with Avanan. Appreciate you joining us today. This is a really interesting topic. Those of you that tuned in to the presidential debate the other night heard the candidates. You know, one of the few things, if any, that they agreed on is that cybersecurity is a real issue in this country, and I'm sure all, if not most of you, would agree as well. Phishing has become the attack of choice in 2016, so this is a really timely topic. But what can you do about it? You know, we work very closely with Microsoft and Office 365 and other cloud SaaS applications in helping to make it more secure. And we're going to show you today in just a minute how what we're doing here can help combat all sorts of cloud security concerns. The one that we're going to focus on today happens to be phishing because it seems to be so widespread and pervasive. I think I saw a recent estimate that phishing is going to cost U.S. businesses about $4 billion this year, which is a huge, huge wake-up call, or at least it should be. So before I steal any more thunder from my colleague Michael, I'm going to turn things over to him. And the image that you see on your screen right now, we're going to circle back to that later on in the presentation. But what you're looking at there in the center of the screen is the Avanan Cloud Security Platform, which basically lets you apply any security to any cloud with just one click. But let's get into the issues here. Let me turn it over to you, Michael. Take it away.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Chris, for the introduction. In today's discussion, I'm going to explain the various types of phishing attacks and look at the statistics that have pushed phishing to the #1 security concern for 2016. Then I'll look at the steps that every company should take to protect themselves, from the server to the inbox, and then explain why cloud-based email like Office 365 poses new problems for both the attackers and the defenders. Finally, we'll introduce the tools that Avanan and our partners have built to address this threat directly. So phishing. Phishing is a form of social engineering, typically via email, with a malicious attachment or a link that tricks the user into revealing some type of confidential information or install some malware. This is actually a pretty broad definition, but no matter which one you use, they all have a single variable in common, and that's tricking the user. So there are three major types of phishing attacks. Most people are familiar with the URL type of phishing, in which a message directs the user to a spoofed website that looks and acts just like a page they use every day. It could be a banking site or Facebook or an Office or Google login. In fact, this was how the DNC was compromised earlier this year. So while all the headlines, though, are about financial attacks, in 2016, over 80% of URL phishing attacks like this were actually for online credentials. Instead of, like, let's say, Bank of America or Citibank, they were actually more likely to spoof your Office 365 login or Google or Box or other online credential. Now, more recently, though, there have been the other two types of phishing attacks have hit the headlines. This year, we saw a surge in Trojan malware that instead of fooling the user to click on a link, it convinced them to open a malicious attachment. In fact, most of the ransomware payloads this year were delivered exactly this way. And then finally, and a little bit more subtly, were the emails that didn't contain a URL, didn't contain an attachment, but were convincing enough to cause someone to send money or send sort of confidential information directly to the attacker. In fact, the so-called business email compromise fooled hundreds of unsuspecting employees to wire over $1 billion in funds this year just because of a message.
Did we lose Michael?
Is actually part of a long-term trend. Way back in 2009, over 50% of corporate breaches were actually due to direct attacks on our company servers. Compromised users and endpoints and network attacks and storage breaches were actually kind of a sideshow then. But since that time, we've tightened up the data centers. We've added our firewalls, we've added application firewalls, and we've eliminated all the server vulnerabilities. So what we've seen are that direct attacks on the data center have gone down, but now breaches due to a compromised user is actually as common as an attack on a server. In fact, if you combine attacks on user devices and the users themselves, they are greater than all other breaches combined. So what's happened is that over time, all other forms of breaches have gone down while user and user device attacks have gone up. And this trend becomes even more apparent when we look at the various methods that were used. First, it's clear that the number of breaches per year is increasing exponentially. And while those top three categories that you see there, the credential hacking and malware and social engineering, include methods other than pure phishing that we're talking about today, you can clearly see the trends that got us here to 2016. The key metric for 2016 is that 92% of all the breaches in the last year began with email. It really can't be stated any more clearly than that. So this has been a trend that's been years in the making, but let's look at some of the statistics that explain why attendees at this year's Black Hat said phishing is the #1 concern for 2016. So since 2008, Google has been scanning for and tracking new phishing sites, and in the past 5 years, the number of newly discovered phishing sites has grown kind of slowly, typically ranging between 100 and 200,000 new phishing sites per week. Now that's pretty large already. Over 100,000 new phishing sites per week. In 2016, however, Google is now discovering over 500,000 new phishing sites every single week. This is on a scale that requires automation and sophistication similar to, I would say, some of the largest ISPs, especially since it has to be done very quickly and very stealthily. In fact, we don't even know if this number is the true number of new phishing sites. It could be twice or even 10 times this. So here's another, again, exponential looking graph. And it shows the number of unique versions of malware that have been discovered and submitted to avtest.org. Now, while this includes all forms of malware, including those used in phishing attacks, it shows that for every advance we make in building better and better signatures to detect malicious files, attackers have automated the tools that bypass the signature-based systems that we've pretty much grown to rely on. It explains why, even with the latest antivirus tools, we see the same attacks come and go and then reappear even if our signatures are up to date. An attacker might create one core piece of malware and then use a variety of tools to recompile it over and over and over again, each with its own MD5 hash and potentially requiring an entirely new signature to be recognized. In fact, one malware family might spawn millions of different variations. In fact, a good example is the rise in ransomware we've seen this year. In fact, this has been called the year of ransomware, netting over $1 billion for the attackers. This chart shows the number of new ransomware families that we've seen each quarter for the last decade. Each of these families, like Cerber or Jigsaw or Configure, might spawn 1 million different unique variations. Again, 2016 is like no other. While we used to see just 1 or 2 new families each quarter, we saw 29 before April, and by June, we found almost 80 more. And because these attacks have been so lucrative, we really don't foresee them subsiding anytime soon. Now, the reason they're so lucrative is because they use phishing as the primary means of deployment. If we look just at ransomware, for example, and analyze the known vectors, we see that email or spam or phishing represents over 71% of all ransomware. What that means is that the user is the vulnerability. There's no exploit kit. There's no need for a software or some sort of app store vulnerability. So, and I guess to make that clear, before we go any further, I want to kind of take a moment to explain why phishing is such a popular tool. Because you have to understand that for every attack, there is the delivery tool and the payload. Now, the payload could be anything. It could be a keylogger or some sort of CNC agent, or in the case of ransomware, it could be the file encryptor itself. And for most attacks, the payload might actually be free and off the shelf or really cheap for the attacker. The most significant cost of an attack is actually the delivery mechanism. It used to be that most attacks were delivered via some sort of OS or Office or Adobe vulnerability. Attackers would target this weakness in the desktop to install their payload. Today, however, the cost for these vulnerabilities is skyrocketing. What you see here is an actual price list for a variety of different vulnerabilities. So, to explain this chart, let's say you want to use a hole in Word or in PowerPoint. That would cost you $30,000. Something in Adobe Reader, it would be $80,000. In fact, if you'd like to purchase a back door into the Apple iPhone, that might cost you $500,000. So not only are these expensive, they also have a limited lifespan. In fact, just a couple months ago, you might have heard that the government of Saudi Arabia paid over $1 million for 3 different iOS vulnerabilities so they could spy on a single dissident. Now, unfortunately for them, he reported those suspicious links to Apple, and they closed all 3 vulnerabilities in a single update. And so this is why phishing is so popular. It costs nothing to convince somebody to click on a file and install malware for me, and phishing never expires. So this is what phishing offers to the bad guys. Guaranteed delivery with no expiration. Nothing delivers like a well-written email. Now the problem is that no matter how well we train our employees, the attackers will always be ahead of the curve. We might teach them to recognize a phishing email one year, but then the attackers they'll improve their grammar, or they will start using spell check. One thing they've done is actually made them more personal, so that they are as good as the best marketers when it comes to writing emails for a specific user. And one sign of this is that in a recent analysis of over 8 million sanctioned phishing tests across multiple vendors, 30% of employees opened the email and 12% of them actually clicked on the URL or on the attachment. This is actually up 11% from 11% last year. So no matter how well we train them, it's actually naive of us to believe that each and every employee can be 100% effective at recognizing an attack among the hundreds of emails they receive every day. Because once a phishing email hits a user's inbox, the attackers can kind of reliably believe that some percentage of employees are actually going to click on that link. So another thing that has changed is the guaranteed detonation of malware. Of course, the natural response is to make sure that if some things are going to get through the user's inbox, we need to run the latest antivirus on our desktops and make sure they're up to date. And this has been core to our endpoint defenses for years. But again, the malware authors are 2 steps ahead. Most attackers now pre-test their code to bypass or even actively disable most brands of desktop protection. In fact, one of their favorite tricks is to send a perfectly benign document that actually downloads the malware after the user opens it, totally bypassing the desktop engine. In fact, most attacks come out of what are called cloud-based malware factories that, like I described before, they take a core piece of code and then recompile it over and over and over again to create unique files for each of the victims. Not only do they slip by or even overwhelm most signature-based systems, in 2016, 99% of malware hashes were only good for less than a minute. And most individual pieces of malware were actually seen only once. So you can imagine difficulty in keeping up with signature-based systems. Now, up till now, I've been talking about the rise in phishing attacks in general. But what about Office 365? It turns out that attackers are starting to treat Office 365 users uniquely. And these types of attacks are on the rise. So before we go to the next step, let's ask the question: how are people using Office 365 now? Now, obviously, this discussion is about email, but we'd like to learn more.
So very good. So folks, if you could just take a second to chime in your answers. You can do multiple choice on this, multiple select. Please take a second to on your screen choose which you're using, how you're using Office 365 for mail, for files such as OneDrive, SharePoint, your apps like Word and PowerPoint, Excel. You're not using it yet. or over your dead body will you use Office 365? And of course, you can use a combination of those within reason. So go ahead and chime in those answers. We'll throw up the results in a second. And reminder, while we're putting in those answers, that the Q&A is live. I have seen some questions come in, and those are at the top of the queue, and we'll get to those during Q&A. Okay? All right. Michael, should we put up the results? Not too surprising there, given this is a Redmond Magazine webinar. But somebody said that last time we did one. But what is a little bit surprising, Michael, I'm sure you agree, is that mail is clearly out there in the forefront among the other areas of Office 365. Would you agree?
Absolutely. In fact, I'm getting less and less surprised by these kinds of statistics. And in fact, kind of points to my next slide in that another thing that makes 2016 so different is the exponential rise of Office 365. So it used to be Google was a leader in online email, and Office was a discipline also ran. But even more significantly, cloud-based email adoption by publicly listed companies is going almost 100% towards Office 365. And what this means is that Microsoft's being very, very successful in deploying its online email. And more importantly, the targets of a lot of these phishing attacks are more likely to be the publicly listed companies that Office 365 is going after. So this is why we're starting to see some trends when it comes to malware and phishing attacks that are specific to Office 365. So let's take a look first about kind of the move to Office 365 in general. Now, we actually think that is a great idea, that the first thing people notice when they move to Office 365 is that they see a huge reduction in spam, in malware, in phishing emails, because Microsoft has their own built-in antivirus and phishing protection. And because of the economies in scale, not only is Office 365 that much more reliable, more scalable, it can also be that much better and that much faster in detecting new attacks. They can handle billions of emails a day and identify an attack on one site long before they've actually arrived at yours. So we are not about to say you should keep your email in your data center when the truth of the matter is you're actually going to get more secure email in Office 365. That said, however, there is still room for improvement, which is one reason why Office offers an additional level of protection with their advanced threat protection. So we're not sure actually how many of their customers are using it because it is an extra cost, but we would recommend it because it includes that additional detonation chamber or sandboxing tool that is now the kind of the industry standard for measuring attachments. So what's nice is that Office does a great job of filtering that advanced threat protection filters as well, but we're still seeing attacks getting into the user's inbox, and that's the goal. We cannot or should not trust the user to be the last line of defense. Our goal from this point onward is to keep those phishing attacks out of the user's inbox. So Microsoft has actually been kind of a victim of its own success. As more and more of their targets move to Office Mail, attackers are now specifically writing and testing their code against Microsoft security. Kind of in the same way that they would try different pieces of malware against the desktop or the desktop AV, they're now writing it against Office 365 specifically. In fact, the June 22nd server attack is a prime example. Now, you remember in the earlier graph where Google and Microsoft represented just about 12 to 13% of corporate email. Well, in 2016, over a third of corporate breaches were through cloud-based email. In other words, attackers are starting to move their sites to Office and Google Mail. So this kind of begs the question. You moved your email to Office 365 because it is a much better place. However, if the attackers are moving there, what's next? What do we do? So if you're serious about your move to the cloud and you're serious about security, where do you go from here? How do you deploy defense in-depth security for your email in the cloud, your email in Office 365? Well, this is what we do. Whether you're using Office 365 or Amazon or Box or ShareFile or Slack or any other cloud, Avanan has partnered with over 60 of the industry's top vendors to provide a full stack of security. Now, we offer anti-phishing and multi-vendor antivirus and sandboxing, but also shadow IT management and endpoint compliance and anomaly detection and file encryption, file sanitization, single sign-on, and so forth. But today, we're just going to look at those tools that address Office 365 and email security. So, a short look at the architecture. The Avanan solution is built for the cloud and based entirely in the cloud. It's a platform in its truest sense. We're completely out of band because the platform connects via API directly into Office 365. And then for each partner solution, we've created cloud-based versions of their data center tools so that we can build that same defense in-depth security stack that you would normally build in the data center. And because it's based entirely in the cloud, it takes just a couple minutes to deploy, and we can spin up a new security tool in just a couple seconds. And because we're cloud native, there's no redirection of traffic, no proxy, no agent, no appliance. It's completely transparent to users who they connect exactly as they always do. They connect directly to Office 365. And the API system gives us 100% visibility that a proxy system would not allow. So we can actually do a lot more sophisticated things, which we'll describe a little bit later. So let's look at some of the different layers that we can add. Now, the first is sandboxing. In fact, years ago, malware sandboxing pretty much supplanted signature-based systems as the best way or minimum requirement to identify malware. And you're probably running one of our partners in your data center. A couple of examples here, the Palo Altos or the FireEye or Checkpoint. What we've done is we've actually taken exactly the same solution and moved it into the cloud. Now, this is the best way to get malware out of the user's inbox. But what about URLs and spoofed emails? Well, this is where we've partnered with some of the best anti-phishing tools. And while Microsoft does a really great job of filtering most spam, especially given its size and its reach, it's pretty limited, however, in its top-down approach. What we offer is a bottom-up analysis to look for those emails, especially spear phishing and business email attacks that Microsoft really just can't be expected to find. For example, we'll look through all of your previous email history and compare any new emails from the same person with all their previous messages, look through the headers and servers and so on, to see if it is truly the same person. That can't be done at Microsoft scale, but can be done on an individual account scale. So if you suddenly get an email from Hillary Clinton, it can compare her news servers and headers with all of her previous messages to let you know that this is actually a different Hillary, or not your CEO or not your CFO sending you an email. This is something that can only be done on that individual scale and can't be done at the top-down view. So we actually believe this is the best combination to have Office 365 to be that filter for the noise. And then this account-specific phishing analysis that can analyze that conversation between you and your CEO to determine if it's a real conversation. Now, this should be enough to provide complete protection. But we partnered with a few more companies to offer something a bit even more complete. And first of all, we partnered with dozens of your traditional signature-based companies to supplement the signatures that Microsoft is using. And the benefit of this is that we're that much faster at identifying malware. Sandboxing has some built-in delays that we expect, and if we can identify that malware before needing to sandbox it, that makes it a much more efficient system. Now, in addition to that, we've partnered with a couple of companies that are using this new artificial intelligence file analysis from Silence and Solibit. Now, these are unique tools that are using a completely different algorithm than sandboxing or signature-based or behavior-based. And more importantly, because it's different, it increases the cost of delivery for the attacker. It would be a very, very unique attacker that could write a piece of malware that could bypass this AI tool, and then every major signature tool, and the phishing analysis, and the sandboxing tools. So pretty much in the end, what we've done is very efficiently, because it's cloud-based, increase the cost of sending email into your user's inbox to the point where it's just no longer cost-effective. And we're no longer relying on the user to be your filter of last defense. So this is what Avanan offers, full stack security. In fact, we have a few customers that have decided, great, we don't need to pay the extra for Microsoft's advanced threat protection because the bad guys are already testing against it, and get that full stack security from Avanan. So what I'd like to do is kind of ask a question now of what tools people are using for their email today.
Very good, Michael. So once again, folks, please go ahead and choose your answer from the question on your screen. What are you using to protect your email today? And again, this is multiple select, so if you're using multiple approaches, you can select more than one. Are you using just the out-of-the-box security? Are you using any type of phishing or spam filter, URL filtering, signature-based virus scanning, malware sandboxing, or AI predictive analysis? So go ahead and chime in your votes there. And again, I'll remind you that the Q&A is still live. We have quite a few questions rolling in. So if you do have any questions that you want to make sure that we get to, you want to make sure you get those lined up into the queue so that we can answer those as they come in. Okay, Michael, let's see what the results reveal. Interesting.
So that's actually pretty much what we expect. This is what we see with most customers, and that is one, you're doing exactly what you should do, and that is phishing and spam filtering, signature-based virus scanning. That is the default. If you're not doing those things, then pretty much anything can get into your mailbox. I do notice that people are using the malware sandboxing tools, and most of those are probably redirecting traffic through an MTA. And then the new AI predictive analysis, that is something that's brand new, and we actually foresee that as the next minimum layer of defense for email. So what I'd like to do is actually show you a demo of the Avanan system. And in fact, to put the demo in context, what I'm going to do is this. We have two separate Office 365 accounts. Both of them have advanced threat protection, so they are Microsoft's best security. But we call one of them unprotected because it is the standalone Office 365 with advanced threat protection. The other is an Office 365 account that is connected to Avanan. What we're going to do is send a piece of malware to both and watch what it looks like from the user's perspective when it comes to detecting and blocking malware.
This is the, quote, unprotected account. It is a standard Microsoft Office mail account, but it is protected using their advanced threat protection. And this is the so-called protected account. It is protected by Avanan's platform. So what I'm going to do is send a piece of malware to both. I'm going to do that from Gmail. So let's compose a message in Gmail and send it to both the unprotected and the protected accounts. I'll fill in a subject and then attach a few files. Now, we have a number of real malware that we can send. In fact, what I'm going to do is show it from the attacker's point of view, where I can actually send a handful of different pieces of malware. And what you'll notice is as it's being uploaded, Google will scan each file for malware. And you'll notice the first one got through, and then it actually detected a virus in a couple of them. So what we found is that if it gets through Google, it will actually make it through Office. We don't know why, but that's the trend we've seen. So I'm obviously not going to send the viruses. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete all of these and send a piece of malware that is a little bit more benign. So what I'm going to do is go to a website where you can actually download these files yourself. It's called checkyourstep.com. And what this does is actually generate malware kind of in the same way that the malware factories do by creating a brand new version of each piece of malware. You can actually download multiple versions of them. It creates a new one. You can download it, create another one, download it. Each one of these is seen as unique by your virus scanners, each with its own hash and everything. So let me open up one of these files just to show you what it looks like. You've probably seen something similar in your inbox from the real ransomware writers. But if we look at the embedded macro, you can see here that this macro opens up Internet Explorer, and because visibility is set to true, you can actually see it happen. But of course, if this were real malware, you wouldn't even see it happen. In this case, it goes back to that website, checkyourstep.com, and frankly speaking, this file should never reach your inbox. So I'm going to take one of these, attach it to the email, and of course, Google says it's okay, so I'll send it to both, and they arrive in the inbox. There we go. So the malware requested made it through, and we can see, of course, that Microsoft's inherent security, including their advanced threat protection, allowed that file to get through immediately. Now, on the Avanan side, of course, we replace that file with a text file that says the file is being scanned. And then, once it's been scanned by both the signature-based systems and the AI systems and the sandboxing systems, the files replaced, basically telling the user that the attachment has been quarantined. One of the options we offer is to replace that file with a sanitized version that would download the Word file but strip it of all macros. So let's see what this looks like from Avanan's point of view. I'm going to open up the Avanan dashboard, and first let's look at the security stack that we have deployed on the Avanan platform. So on the left you can see the cloud SaaS that we're monitoring, including the Office 365 email. And then along the top you can see the variety of tools that we've deployed on the platform to monitor each file. You can see the range of antivirus that we're using to monitor, from Checkpoint to OnLab to Bitdefender and Kaspersky. We're using 2 different malware sandboxing tools, Checkpoint and Palo Alto, Predictive Malware from Silence, as well as Anti-phishing from Siren. So let's look at the attachment we just sent. So you can see that both the Sophos and Checkpoint antivirus thought that file was okay, which is not surprising because it was designed to bypass the signature-based systems. Silence, the AI tool, identified it as suspicious, as well as the Checkpoint Sandblast, the sandboxing tool. They identified it as a potential malware. And the benefit of the sandboxing tools, we can actually see why it was considered malware. We can see the screenshots from the sandboxing, as well as the applications that open. In this case, opening up Internet Explorer. So again, this is something you can test on your own. I recommend going to checkyourstep.com, download your own piece of malware, and see if it gets through your mail system. If it hits your inbox, you are not secure. So the point of the demonstration is to show that the only way to defend yourself against today's attacks is a multi-vendor, multi-technology platform that uses different technologies to test for malware. So thank you for the time. Stephen, I wonder if we have any questions.
There are some questions in the queue, Michael. Thank you for that. And I'll remind everybody that we do have a few minutes left for Q&A for any other questions that people want to get into the queue. So why don't I go ahead and kick things off? Rex has been very active on Q&A here, and one of his questions is, how well do advanced firewalls like Palo Alto with sandboxing or Cisco ASA protect against phishing attacks?
That's a great question. So this is a case in which those tools are kind of the bare minimum that you need to be monitoring every file that goes in and out of your mailboxes. Phishing this year has become a little bit more sophisticated, which is why this is probably a good time for you to start looking at phishing-specific tools. The CEO phishing attack is a good example. There's really no way, except for company-specific analysis, to determine that that person is not your CEO. It can't be done at scale. It needs to be done on a per account basis. So, and the reason why we're seeing so many of those this year is because the bad guys have been thwarted by the sandboxing tools and the Palo Altos and so on, because they are very, very effective.
Andy had a couple of comments. First he said, wow, and then he said a very comprehensive solution. So I don't really think there's a question there, but thank you, Andy. Chris wants to go get right down to business. Chris wants to know how much per user.
So obviously this is a platform. In fact, our business model is to make money on our platform, not on the individual solutions. So first of all, our pricing starts around $5 per user per month, but obviously drops very quickly as you start going to scale. So the larger your enterprise, the much more affordable it is. And then when it comes to each of the individual tools, because we're cloud-based and because we're doing things at scale, this is probably the least expensive way to deploy any one of these tools that you would add to the stack, which is actually why most of our customers can now afford to deploy so many different layers. They, instead of deploying just one signature AV, they deploy 4 or 8 or a dozen, and why we see people going ahead and doing that full stack security because it can be done so affordably.
Very good. By the way, I should take a minute to mention that everybody on the call today is welcome to sign up for a live demo for your own unique organization. All you have to do is go to avanan.com/Redmond, and there you'll find some resources relative to today's webinar, some videos, and an infographic on the anatomy of an Office 365 attack. There you'll also see links to request a live demo. We'll schedule something with you and your team, privately, so that you can, ask more candid questions. And also, if you'd like to take a deeper dive, you can sign up for a free trial of the platform and, use it on your own data and see what kind of malware is getting through to your users right now that the Avanan platform would capture. Back into the questions here. Let's see. Chris would like to know if we are at liberty to provide any customer as a reference. I'll answer that one. Yeah, we definitely have customers as references. In fact, we have case studies on our website under the Resources tab. If you go to, I think it's the News tab, you'll see a reference there from ServiceSource, which company we met at RSA last year, and came home and they said, you were one of 2 companies that was interesting to me at RSA. It was Avanan and Cylance. And they said, but Cylance isn't on your platform. So we added them, and now ServiceSource is a customer using Avanan and Cylance together. So that's on our website, and we absolutely have other references as well. Let's see. Reginald has a question. What is the best way to minimize and or monitor phishing attacks?
That's a great question, and really it has to be done in an automated way. It used to be we could train our employees to become better and better, but there's no way employees can keep up. So it has to be done in an automated way, and which is why Gartner, building a Magic Quadrant, why there's so many new companies entering this market, because again, this is the year of phishing, and it's only going to get greater. You really do need a dedicated solution for phishing.
Okay. I'm sorry if I don't get your name right. Torbjorn, I believe, wants to know, does this affect Office 365 performance?
No, that's actually key in the fact that we are not inline. We're not an MTA, so no email goes through us before it hits Office 365. So you don't get that delay of, hey, I sent you an email, I didn't get it. Sent you an email, didn't get it. We connect via API, so there is 0 delay for the incoming email and 0 delay for the user. They connect directly to Office 365. Nothing goes through us. And because we connect with that API, we can do all the things we do in parallel and do it in a way that's more comprehensive. So when a new email comes in, we can look at that individual email as well as go back through the inbox and look more globally as needed. But again, because we're out of band, the user doesn't see a microsecond of delay.
Okay, and I think that sort of answers the next question from Mark. Mark points out that Microsoft Advanced Threat Protection adds a couple of minutes worth of delay when sending attachments. How much additional delay does Avanan add to the wait? I think we already answered that one. Let's see. There's a couple more questions down here. I'm trying to get to the most relevant ones. Charles has another comment. Most firewalls are allowing nuisance items through expecting the end user to catch them. I think he meant though expecting the end user to catch them. So thank you for that comment, Charles. Diane's question. So the pricing is $5 per month. Is there additional charges based on the security products that are used?
Yes, there is. So those can be purchased just by flipping a switch on our matrix that you saw there. We offer a 30 days free trial, so most customers will go ahead and flip them all on so they can actually determine the value of each one individually. And then you can purchase through us, and typically that can be the cheapest way just because we are a reseller at volume. But if you already have a license for some of the tools, or you have an agreement through another reseller or channel, you can actually purchase that license for each individual tool that way. So yeah, we do have some customers that are paying no additional because they already have a site license for some of the tools. Again, one of the benefits of being in the cloud is that if you have a choice between running one of these tools in your data center versus in the cloud, it can actually be done typically more cheaply in the cloud.
And Sean has a follow-up question related to pricing. He wants to know what's the ballpark price per security provider.
So typically it's going to be a couple of dollars per user depending upon the tool. The more sophisticated tools, sandboxing and so on, a little bit more. The signature-based tools, typically you're buying them a half dozen at a time. So, but again, yeah, just a couple of dollars per user. Some of them, once you get up to a certain size, you can actually grow faster without a per user charge.
I know we're up against the hour here, but there are a few more questions. If we didn't get to your questions, we'll be following up with you in the next couple of days, reaching out to you personally to see if you have any additional questions. So look for a call from someone here at Avanan, and we'll be glad to answer those questions for you separately. Thank you very much. Chris, back to you.
Yeah, sorry about that, guys. Sometimes Mom and Dad have to come in and ruin all the fun. So sorry about that, guys. But thank you all for attending today's webcast, for all the great questions, for all of you showing up and hanging out for over an hour today. You guys really rock in the audience, so thank you so much. Like we mentioned, if you didn't get your question answered, don't worry. I'll make sure everybody over there gets your questions, gets your name, email address, so that way they can respond to you and get back in touch with you today, tomorrow, and the following day. So keep an eye out for that. But thank you all so much for attending today's webcast, brought to you by Redmond Magazine and sponsored by Avanan. Thank you all for attending. We hope you have a great day.